All right, so here I am at the machine. I've got the differential hanging there, and I've already lowered it between the frame, and I'm about to put the sealant on. It takes a flexible gasket sealant on that flange, and then you put the diff in, before you slide it in, and then you just bolt, put all those bolts in and put those bolts in. One thing I had to do, I found a newer service magazine article on these bolts on the ring gear. So last week I had to order new bolts to take a longer bolt with all thread and a thicker washer, and I didn't get them till this morning. So this morning I had to take this back apart. I had to change all these bolts, and the new torque on these is 70 foot-pounds, and then you turn them 120 degrees. Now, the old bolts, it was 50 foot-pounds or 54 foot-pounds and 60 degrees. So these things are freaking tight. So it's got the newer bolts in it now, the newest bolts. I actually found 4 service magazine articles on it. So anyways, I wanted to show that, and here's where it goes in the differential, and here's the machine. Hopefully that sun's not blaring us out. All right, welcome back to the shop. So in my last video, I tore apart this differential. This differential is out of a Cat 735 6-wheel drive articulated haul truck. It's the center differential, or the front drive axle, as some would call it. So in the last video, if you haven't watched it, you should go back and watch it. You can see how I disassembled this. You can see what the problem was, and you can see what kind of the problems that we have with these. So this carrier here is shot, this and this, and they're destroyed because, well, that ring gear laying over there, the bolts all came out, and then it spun on there, and it destroyed that. Destroyed the ring gear and pinion gear. As some of the bolts that came out went through there and broke the teeth. So I got the new ring and pinion gear. That was a little late showing up. And then I bought a used carrier. It's sitting right over there. And the used carrier showed up yesterday, and it was trash, or the day before yesterday, and it was garbage. It's worse than the one I took out. So I had to order one from Cat, about just over $2,000 for this. It just came in from York, Pennsylvania. So I'm gonna be putting this differential together in this video. First thing I need to do, I've got to heat up these races that I want to take out, like this pinion race. I'm going to heat that up, and I'll show you guys how I heat that up and why I heat that up to get it out. And then I got to prep a few things, and then I'm going to clean up. I got to steam clean that carrier or the housing. I've got to clean all this stuff up. Got to clean my plywood, and then I'm going to assemble this differential. So I've got my torch set up. I had to rob a bunch of tools out of my service truck. In the past, some of these tools I didn't bother to have here in the shop because I always had my service truck here, but now that my son's back from France and he's working for me, he's out in the truck most of the time. So I had to steal the torch out of his truck, torque wrenches, all this stuff here. That's what this pile of tools is. So the first thing I'm gonna do before I start cleaning this stuff up, now the bearings for this intermediate gear, this is the gear that comes, where the drive shaft comes to it. It runs the shaft, runs through it to run the rear differential. And then there's a gear here that'll run a gear here that'll turn the pinion. These bearings are in good shape. This differential doesn't have a lot of hours on it, and all the bearings are really good, but I do need to change the bearings on the carrier because I'm replacing the carrier, and also on the ring and pinion. So I want to get this race out. So I've got to heat this race up, and I've got to get this race out without destroying the shims. Otherwise I need to buy new ones. And later in the video I'll show you how we set those shims. It's not very hard, but it's just a process, and I'll show you how to do that. But right now I'm going to heat this race up. I'm going to get the torch. I'm just going to heat a strip here red hot and a strip over here red hot. And what that'll do is when it gets heated up that hot, it causes the molecules to expand. And since the race is confined in that bore, it has nowhere for the race to go. So those molecules compress themselves. And then when it cools off, then that bearing's going to shrink. And then when you do it right, that bearing will just literally fall out. If you just tip this over, it'll just slide out. A lot of times you'd have to just tap them a little bit, but instead of having about a 4 or 5 thousandths press, it's going to be just loose. So I'm going to heat that up, and that way it can cool down while I am cleaning up. And I also have to heat this race here because I want to get this one out as well. And then one more thing I'm going to need the torch for is that ring gear. When I go to put it on the new carrier, we have to heat it up, and I've got the paperwork over here that says how hot, and we'll go through that in the video too. But we'll heat that up, and then we drop it on in place, and we put 4 bolts in it and torque them to a certain spec, and then we have to let it cool down to I think it says like 86 degrees or something like that, but it's what, 50 degrees out today? 62 degrees here in the shop. So that's close enough. It just has to be in that range, but basically it has to cool down to like a standard temperature, just room temperature or whatever. And then we pull those bolts back out, then we put them all in, and then we'll torque them all to the set torque. And that's, whoever did it last time, that's where they screwed up. They obviously didn't torque it right, and that's why those bolts fell out. Either that or this was done by a cat dealer. And there was a service magazine article that came out, and a service letter, by the way, and that's why they did it, was the service letter. They changed these bolts. They put a better bolt in it. And either they didn't change the bolts like they were supposed to, or they didn't do the process correctly and they didn't torque them right. So I'm going to go over that specifically in this video, how to do that right. Some of the installation stuff is pretty rudimentary. It'll be in the video, but a lot of it will be on time lapse. But some stuff like setting the ring gear on, torquing it, and setting the run out and the backlash. I'll definitely show you guys how I do that in this video. So anyways, let's get to it. I do need to change the shimming. I'm going to have to order some shims. So this, but it makes a little bit of a mess. It's going to be pretty easy to get this one out. It isn't too bad. Alright, so we got that cone heated up. And now we'll do this one here. These differentials are usually pretty robust in these. They're usually very well built by the dealer. I know a lot of history on this rock truck because I used to own it years ago. I know what happened with this differential before. You know, the dealer rebuilt it on a service letter, but it did some upgrades in it. All right, so that's it on those two races. Those are the only two I have to heat up to get out. The other races that I will be changing are going to be in here. Those are in the adjusters for the backlash, and those don't need to be heated up to come out because they don't press in. They actually just are floating in that in this collar right here, and that's how they're adjustable. When you tighten this nut up, this race will slide one way or the other, you know, to set the backlash on the differential itself. So I'll let these cool off because I'm gonna actually be steam cleaning this, steam cleaning that, cleaning up the rest of the stuff, clean my floor, get everything cleaned up and ready to go. By the time I'm done with all that, these races will come out, and then we'll start going together with this thing. So here's all here's the diff and all the old parts. I steam cleaned everything that I needed to clean up. The small stuff I'll clean by hand. I like to use starting fluid on that. It just gets the oil off, gets anything that's stuck on there off there. And you don't need to get all that stuff wet. You know, those gears don't want to get wet, stuff like that. Otherwise it's going to start rusting if we don't get oil on things right away. So anyways, that's ready to go as far as we start to assemble. Here's all the new parts. I got all the bearings, bolts, all the junk I need. Here's the new carrier, the new ring gear. So the first step, well, the next step I'm going to do now is to put that ring gear onto the carrier. And I will show you guys real quick. Here's the sequence. So it says to heat the bevel gear to 248 Fahrenheit. Install the bevel gear onto the housing. Immediately install 4 bolts and hard washers into the bevel gear. Install the bolts so that the bolts are spaced 90 degrees apart. Install the hard washers with a flat face against the housing. Now this is something I've always done, and I get guys that say it's not necessary, but all the cat hardware, these washers have a flat side and a rounder side. You always put the flat side down onto the work, and the bolt gets that rounder side. And I've had guys tell me I'm stupid for doing that, but I always do it, especially in transmissions and stuff like that. And right here, this is Cat saying that you should do that. So anyways, this is to install the remaining bolts and washers. You just screw them in hand tight. You don't put them in any farther. Just that way you know it's all lined up, so you don't have this thing shrink into place and then it's not going to line up. Okay, then allow the bevel gear to cool to 86 Fahrenheit. After the bevel gear is cooled to the required temperature, loosen the 4 bolts. It says if the 4 initially tightened bolts are not loosened before torquing, the joint will not reach a full press fit. Tighten all the bolts on the bevel gear in a star pattern. Mark each bolt after it's been tightened, and then you want to torque each bolt to 52 foot-pounds, 52 plus or minus 7.5. And then you tighten all the bolts by an additional 60 degrees. So then we'll have to mark them and use the impact, and we'll be able to turn them 60 degrees farther. So I don't even know what that torque value is going to be, but Kat's got that figured out, I guess. So we're going to do that next. We're going to get that started, because once we get this on here and get it hot and everything and get it on there, it's going to need to cool for a while, probably about an hour. It's pretty cold out today, so it'll cool pretty quick. But in the meantime, while that's cooling, I'm going to just go ahead and put my new races in, put bearings on stuff that need it, and get everything ready to go. That way, by the time that's cooled off, I can torque it, and then I can just keep going with my assembly. Okay, so I've got the ring gear here. I set it down on this old planetary housing here, so I have something to heat it up on. Usually I have my truck here, and I do it on the bed of the truck. It's kind of throwing me off a little bit here. I got to do it a different way, but it's no big deal. I took these fine thread grade 8 bolts. They're a 1/2 inch fine thread, and I cut the heads off, and I've got 2 of them in here, so that once this is hot, I got to grab it with my gloves on and set it down on here, and that'll help index to index it, so I'm not off half a hole or whatever. It'll get me lined up right away. I've got 4 bolts here just waiting. I've got these marked so that once I get that on there, I can screw these in by hand. Somewhere around here, here's my torque wrench. I've got it set to 50 foot-pounds, ready to go. All right, so I finally got that heated up. It's about 50 degrees out today. Yeah, it's 53 in my shop, so it's about 50 degrees outside. It took forever. I didn't have my rosebud for my torch because Alex threw it back in the truck yesterday, and I didn't get it back out this morning. So it took forever to heat it up. But I got it up to 250, got it on there, got the first 4 bolts torqued to 50 foot-pounds, and then I just ran the other ones in with that little air ratchet, just so they're just run in. Okay, so I just beat this race out. This is the first one that I'd heated up, and it just tapped right out with the 4-pound hammer. So right behind here are the shims that go in there. In fact, I'm just going to wipe this clean. Oh, there they go. They were stuck in there. I didn't want to jack them up, but all right. So here's the shims. Yeah, I think that's it. So I can clean this boss up here, this bore. So what they do, there's also a number stamped in the housing here as well, right here. I think it's in this group somewhere on here. It's stamped on here, and they measure all this stuff so they know, like if this turned out to be a 0, it would have been perfect, and if the pinion was a 0, it would have been perfect. It wouldn't need any shims, but they don't come out that perfect when they're making it. This one's stamped so it knows how many shims it needs. If the pin, well, wherever the pinion shift is over there, if that's like a baseline setting, which it happens to be on this one. So on my old pinion, where did I put it? Okay, so on my old pinion, it shows the numbers here, and they call it an HD number is what it is. Right there. This one is HD 0. So this came out perfect. This came out perfect tolerance as far as, the tolerance that they expected it to have or whatever. If this is different, see, that's just -0. If this had like a 3 or like 0.3 or whatever, that's how many shims I would add. Or if it was a negative number, that's how many shims I would take away or whatever from the base amount of shims I had. If you're buying all new parts, you could still do the math, because you could do the math with that compared to the housing. Or if you're using an existing carrier and ring and pinion group in a new housing, you can do the math with the number on there and compared to the old housing, right? So this one, I take this HD number on the old pinion, and then I look at the new pinion and I look for the HD number on it. Well, this one here, I don't know why it didn't say HD, but that's what they used to say. It just says 2A, and then it says 0. So this one's a 0 as well. So basically this came out perfect as well, if they didn't over machine it or whatever. So I'm going to use the exact same amount of shims. So that makes it a lot easier. So now I just got to clean this up. I'll clean that bore up with some starting fluid. I'll clean up those shims, and then I'll put my new cone in there, or my new cup in there with those shims, and then it should come out perfect. All right. There we go. So if you don't have a press, which a lot of times we'd be working in the field and we wouldn't have a press to put bearings on like that, you can heat the bearings up. You heat them up to 275, I believe, Fahrenheit, and then you just slide them right on. So you can press them on or heat them on. I'd rather press them on when I can, just because it's a lot easier, and then I don't have to wait for it to cool down and stuff either. This is all cleaned up inside. I've got the shims out. I wiped them down. If you notice, there's some thicker shims and then some real thin ones. I like to take and put the real thin shims between the thick ones. That way they kind of get sandwiched in there, rather than having, you know, a thin shim kind of on either end where they could have a chance of getting in there crooked or getting screwed up in there somehow. And then here's the new bearing. It's a cat bearing. Doesn't even have the cat number on it. Oh, right there, 1 John 2860. So we're going to take and tap this in. I'm just going to use, I've got an aluminum punch that I use. Been using this thing forever. It doesn't do any damage at all to the race, as you can tell. It takes the brunt of the damage. Another way to do this is to either, you could take and put them in like a bucket of ice and dump a bunch of rock salt in there. That'll freeze them and shrink them a little. Or get, I have a liquid nitrogen doer. It just takes too much effort to go get the liquid nitrogen to, you know, to run down to you know, like the welding shop to get the liquid nitrogen. I don't even know if there's a shop around here that has it right now, so it's kind of a pain. But it works nice for putting these together. You just soak that race in a bucket. You know, got like a insulated bucket I have to pour the liquid nitrogen in, and then this thing will shrink so much you could just set it right in the hole, and then you'll see it as it warms up. It'll start getting frost on it and start getting condensation on it. Just kind of, and then it just fits right in the hole without even beating on it. But if it was a bigger job and I had a ton of these to do, I'd probably go get it. But for just a few bushings, I'm not going to bother, or a few races. So I'm going to go ahead and tap this thing in with this aluminum punch, and then we'll move on to the next step. And let's gotta be careful. When we first start pressing, it might go either way. It might try to teeter in there, but we'll have to try to get it to go straight. We might have to stop and straighten it a couple times. I came over and felt this thing. It still feels warm, but I guess it's because it's cold out. If I put the flare on here, it's showing 85, 89 at one point. The hub's actually, I don't know, every once in a while I'll hit like a warm spot. But you could, I don't know if the camera's picking up the colors, but it's in the 80s right now. So now I guess I could flip it over and I could torque it. So I went ahead and torqued all these to the initial torque of 57 plus or minus 7.5. I did about 56, 57 is what I set the torque wrench to. And then I marked them all as I went. And then now I need to tighten each one of them another 60 degrees. So what I did is I marked these. So I took at a flat spot on each one, I marked it on the housing. They're kind of in different, they're not all uniforms because I was just doing what's easiest for me. So you see how I don't have the camera pick it up, but there's a flat edge of that bolt lined up with that mark. And then I take my socket and I put a mark on my socket. I might put a brighter mark on that. But what you do is I put that mark on the next flat spot back. So here's where my mark is on here. I'll go to the next flat spot back and put my socket on, so the mark on my socket is on that other one, you know, one behind. And then I can just rotate it until the mark on my socket lines up with the mark on the housing here. And that'll be 60 degrees. They sell a cool little degree wheel thing you can buy that you put on your impact, or your, basically a wrench. You don't want to really put it on impact, but you can. And it'll mark it for you, like it'll tell you when you get there. But it says 60 degrees. There's 6 points on the head, and 6 times 60 is 360, which is a full circle. So it's from one flat spot to the next. So I'm going to find something a little brighter to mark this with, just so it's a little easier. And then I'll just go ahead and I'll do like a crisscross pattern on the thing. Okay, I had most of that on the time lapse, as you guys just saw. But now I want to show you what I'm seeing when I do this. So this flat spot is marked with that black marker. This is marked on a flat spot. So I'm going to line it up so that this mark is on the flat spot behind the one that's marked. And then I'll tighten it up to where these two marks line up. And that's 60 degrees. I gotta check something here. Right there. Alright, so I got that one pressed on. Now the next one I have to press on is this one here. So I'm gonna have to set the camera down and get this all set up. And then this one here doesn't get pressed on until it's in here. Alright, I've got this one set up pretty good. I can press for a little ways and then this here might get stuck on here, so I've got to be careful. But I'm going to get started, I'll get it going, and then if I have to stop and add a different spacer, then I will. Yeah, let's put this on top, I guess. Okay. Okay, so this gear here is one that the axle slides into. So that gear is going to go in there on top of that fiber washer. And I'm going to set this up here on the tripod. So that looks like a good spot. And then we can assemble this thing. You guys can see it. So we got the gear laying in there. It's on that fiber washer. And we know that washer's in place because it's got these 4 holes in here. And these tabs fit right in there. In fact, let's put the washer upside down. And that way the next guy who rebuilds this, if he for some reason needs that part number will probably still be intact. Okay, so we got these assembled. So we have the bearings in the spider gears on the cross. And this is the new style cross. I talked about that in the disassembly video. The old one was just 2 round shafts that went across, and they had notches cut out into them, kind of like Lincoln logs, so they would intermesh. And those things, they were breaking right off the bat. So very early on in these trucks, Cat got rid of that. They already figured out it was no good, so they came out with this update. Right, so we're going to load this in here so that these bevels fit in here inside the radius. We can rotate that and we'll see that it's turning the gear inside there. All right, so these are all in here. The bevels are out. We have bearings in all 4 of these. You can double check that. All right. Crazy tacky red stuff. Because we don't want this falling in there and getting wadded up in there. All right, and then we want to put this gear on top. So this one's going to go right up here on top. This is the other axle shaft's going to go into here. And then we got to line this up. So we've got the cutouts here where they go down over the shafts. That's the only thing that you do need to line up with that. Okay, I'm going to lift that back off and just double check. Yeah, my washer stayed in place. I guess you could set the washer on here, but then you'd have to watch these tabs and make sure that those tabs are going to line up. And then we'll put these bolts in and we'll bolt this together. And I've got the torque spec written here. 77.5 foot-pounds is what we torque these to. So basically, you just run them down with a 1/2-inch gun and slam them on real good and it'll be good. Just kidding. We'll use the torque wrench on it. Get all 12 of these in here. Looks like it takes an 18 millimeter. So I'm going to go ahead and run them down with the 18 millimeter and then I'll get the torque wrench on them and torque them to spec. All right, so I ran those down, and now I just got to make sure that nothing got pressed in there real, wrong or something like that. I'm going to get in here and make sure that this thing still turns freely, and make sure everything's good. And then I'll just torque it down with the torque wrench, 77.5 foot-pounds. Okay, so it's the next day. I kind of ran out of time yesterday. So I got my, I guess this is tooling A according to the book. It's an engine stand that I got from a buddy of mine. It's the first time I've used it. So I took and I welded a couple of studs on here so I could bolt the differential carrier or differential housing onto here, because I'm going to need to rotate it a couple times. And I used to have to do this on the ground. I would always set it up on blocks or do something. It was always a real pain in the butt because you've got to set this, you know, the whole differential unit in there and all the crap you've got to do. This can make it so much easier. So the next step here, I've already had the race in there. So I set the pinion shaft in here, and they have some tooling C you're supposed to buy that goes in here, and somehow it goes across here, and then you have to put the caps on and tighten those down, and then you adjust a bolt and everything just to hold this in place. So I'm just trying this. I just got a ratchet strap and a 2x4. That'll keep it from falling out when I rotate it over. Yeah, this thing is like just like hanging a toy on this thing. This thing is made for, you know, this thing is made for really heavy stuff, you know, like big engines or whatever. So it's actually really nice. Look at this. Just turn the crank. Crank's turning all by itself. Look at that. That thing would break your arm if that thing come around and hit you. God, that's half-inch thick steel. Okay, so there we go. We've got it sitting this way now. Now I can go ahead and get this section assembled here. And it actually goes down first before that gear, so that rides up against the race on the inner race on that roller, on that tapered roller bearing, and then this will go down with that side with the relief with the in the spline there will go down. So the spline will go all the way to the top on the outside here, and then this will rotate down in there. We can just mesh it in here with the other gear, just like that. That drops down. Okay, so now that that's in place, I've got this retainer that goes in here that holds this shaft onto here, and that's that two-piece thing with those two-piece like C-shaped rings that go in there, and they go into the groove on this pinion gear, and then this goes on top to retain those to hold them in place. That goes right in the spline, and then it locks down on there. Got to put a little bit of oil on here, and then you put the seal in here, the O-ring, and I'll take the bearing cage retainer or bearing retainer, whatever they call that. That's going on next. So I'm going to put some oil on those races, and I'm going to set that on, tighten it up, and then we'll go on to the next step. All right, so this is on, it's torqued down. Then the next step was to put this bearing in. I don't know why they make, I guess the bearing has to go on kind of a press fit. It doesn't get a full press fit, but you could heat it up and slide it in, I guess. I just tapped it in, just used a brass punch. It's kind of a pain in the butt because to get this off, you have to use this to press it off. And all you get are these little 16 millimeter metric bolt pusher holes. You get 4 of them, and I broke 2 of them getting this thing off, which I always seem to. So the next step is going to be put this nut on. I'll go ahead and get this nut going, and then I will come back and explain to you guys how to set it, the rolling torque. So the next step is to set this lock nut system on. So you have this one here, it's got the splines all around it, and then it's got this key right here that goes in the keyway. That goes down first, and then this is going to screw on. And then, so what we're going to do, we'll be putting a bolt in here that we could put the torque wrench onto, and then we'll be tightening this nut down until we get the correct rolling torque. And then once we're done with that and that's set, then this will go on top. You just have to keep moving it around until you find, you know, where it'll fit in. These tangs will fit in those tabs, and then once you do get the spot where it goes in, it'll drop all the way flush. Then you put the snap ring on it to hold it down. So we don't need this right now until we get the rolling torque set. All right, so this took quite a bit to get this driven down. I was not able to use my channel locks, so I had to get a punch and kind of lean over this and hold this in place and just beat it, you know, with a 4-pound hammer. So it kind of messed these up a little bit, but it'll all still go back together. If not, I can clean that up. So in the past, I had like a small one of those like twin beam, like, you know, flexible torque wrenches. You know, you'd pull on it and it would just kind of like, you know, as you pull, it would bend to one bar but not the other, and it would show you what your torque is. And the thing was never very accurate. So a while back I was at a gun shop when I was in Tucson, and I found this. It's a little torque wrench, and it does inch pounds. It has a memory thing. It's got a lot of cool stuff on it. So I set it up so I could put it on here and then just rotate it, and it'll show me the inch pounds that I'm pulling. So I'm pulling about 6 inch pounds right there. So now I can tighten this up a little bit more, and I'll keep doing that until I get right about 12 inch pounds. And this thing's going to save me a lot of headaches. Turn this thing probably 1/8 of a turn or more. And one note too as well, you know, they tell you to put that tooling on here to hold the pinion in place. I took that tooling out, which my tooling was a ratchet strap. That way there's no extra drag on it. Okay, so anyways, I got that, you know, I tightened it down a little bit more, and torque wrench is showing 0. And right now I'm showing 10. I just hit a hard spot. Every once in a while you hit a hard spot. It could just be some debris in there or something. One thing I like to do, you know, after tightening and stuff, is to roll it back and forth by hand a few times, just to make sure everything's kind of sitting where it should. You know, everything's kind of seated. So we're at 9.8, 9.5. We're hitting 10. I'm trying to turn this as steady as I can. Okay, so I tightened it a little bit. I had it a little too tight, so I backed it off a little bit. And then now we're getting like, you know, 11s and right up, almost right up to 12. Every once in a while I'll hit a 12. So I'm going to call that good. And then I can go ahead and reassemble, you know, or finish assembling the lock nut on here. So sometimes you have this lock nut down and you can't find a spot where, no matter where you go, you're not going to find a spot where all these splines line up. Like I'm really close right there. That might work. If it doesn't, you can always back this off just a tiny bit. You know, I don't, you know, if I'm at the top end of the torque, so I'm not going to tighten it anymore to make it fit, but I don't mind backing it off just a slight bit, just to get these to, you know, just to find a spot where this will fit. Looks like the one spot I had was just about perfect. Let's go back and see if we can find that one again. That one's really close there. I'm gonna have to see if this will, I think this will just tap down through there, because I burred it up a little bit. If not, I'll get in there and clean it up a little bit. I'll make sure there's no little chips that are gonna come off here too. And then we'll get that on, we'll put the snap ring on, and then we can finish putting this on. I didn't change the bearings on this, so I don't have to set the preload on this, or the clearance on this tapered roller bearing. I'm just gonna reassemble it with the shims it had, so then I can put the cover on, and that'll be done with this end. Then I can flip it over and we'll put the differential unit in. Okay, so I've got the lock nut on here. So I've got the bottom plate, the lock nut, the top plate, and the snap ring. So this is in place. The rolling torque set right at 12 inch pounds. Replace the retainer here with the shims. Tightened it down, and everything's good. Perfect amount of play. That's all ready. I put a new lip seal in here. Put a new O-ring on here, and I'll go ahead and put this cover plate on top of here, and then this section will be done. All right, I just came back from eating some lunch. Now we can get back to it. So I've got it rotated around, so the pinion shaft is, it's the opposite of what it was before. You can see the saddles up there where the differential is going to sit. These are the adjusters to adjust the the side to side on the differential unit, and that adjusts the backlash. So it's got here's the new bearings. I took out the old bearings. So whenever you do new bearings, you have to do new races. They kind of go together. So here's the adjusters. These bearings are just going to slip right in here. Or not bearings, but the cups, the races. So I'll just kind of tap those in there. They will slide in. There's just a little friction, side to side. But you get them just right, see they'll slide in. So this one I'll just tap that in with the rubber mallet. And then I gotta pick the differential unit up. It weighs about, I think, is it just under 200 pounds? We'll pick that up with the crane. We'll swing it over to sit on here, and we'll hold these bearings in place as we set it down into the saddles. And then we'll put the caps on, and we'll torque the bolts to a preliminary torque. There's like a certain torque you torque them to for setting all this. And then when you're done, that's when you lock them down. Because when you do lock these caps down on here, it does put a bite on these, and it's going to lock these pieces here in place. There are locks on here. This rotates. This is how you adjust that race, on how far the race slides in and out, to push that over, to push the carrier, the whole differential unit over. So we'll go over that when I set this in, and let's get to it. Let's get over here. You guys a better view without the sun screwing everything up. close. So now I got to get these bearing cages in the kind of oriented how they're going to go. All right, so I got this set in here. I forgot to turn the camera back on and film it. I just got kind of wrapped up here with tied up here. We're trying to get this together. One thing I did, I changed the way I was connected here. The bolts that I had welded on there for this, I didn't really trust them. I didn't think they were going to do good for me with all the added weight. So I changed this. So that's one thing. I've got 5/8 bolts, 5/8 grade 8 cat bolts holding that on. And then putting this together is a real pain in the ass because you're picking this thing up, you know, the third member, and then you've got these bearing caps that are kind of balancing on the bearings and they're falling off, flopping all over. And then you got to have the caps on those because these line up in these notches. So if you just set it straight under, then you can't put the caps on because these, you won't be able to get them past these notches because they have a dowel sticking up here on both sides like a sleeve, so you can't just slide it on sideways to go in there. And I had a bar going through here and I was picking up on it this way, and as I was picking it up, you know, of course the strap's pushing on the bearing here, it's getting all floppy. It was a real pain. So I got it set down, then I just reset it with the strap here. I was able to pick it up about an inch or so and get the caps into place, and then I kind of tapped those down into place. So now I'll put the bolts in. I'll look and see what the book says. I know you torque them to a certain torque, and then we can set the backlash, and I'll show you guys how to do that. Okay, I just got the paperwork here. So on these bolts here on these caps, it says to tighten one bolt on each cap to 51 foot-pounds, and then tighten the opposite bolt over here to 4 foot-pounds. And that's why you do that, because it's going to pinch down on here if you torque this all the way. So we're going to go ahead and I'll run those in, I'll torque those down, and then we'll go ahead and go over how to adjust this thing. All right, so I've got these set. I torqued this one and this one to 50 foot-pounds and this one to 4 foot-pounds, which is basically just barely snug. So the first thing you do is you back off this adjuster as you go along and advance this adjuster. This adjuster's on the bevel gear side of it all. You want to go till you have 0 backlash. So I got to where I just got rid of the backlash. I backed it off a little bit, and then I could feel a little backlash, so I forwarded it, you know, turned it clockwise a little bit more, got rid of the backlash. Next thing I'm going to do is rotate this thing 90 degrees so the bevel gears, well, it's going to be horizontal. All right, so I've rotated it now, and I've got it rotated this way because the reason you want it this way is because you have the weight of this whole carrier unit sitting on this lower bearing. And then with no backlash, when I go to adjust it, I'm going to be lowering this down a little bit till I get the correct backlash that I need. And then I tighten this one up, and then that locks it in between the two. But if you just have it sitting up vertical or in any other position or flip the other way, you're not going to get a true measurement because the weight of this is going to be pushing up against that. So I've got a socket on here, and I'm going to see what my rolling torque is. It's about 19 inch-pounds. So we've got to write that down. I'll just write it down in the paperwork here. 19 inch-pounds. Okay, okay, so record the measured torque. So then advance the adjusting nut that is adjacent to the bevel gear, so that's the lower one, and oscillate the bevel gear as you go. Find 0 backlash position. So we need to do that again just to make sure we still have 0 backlash. Then back off the adjusting nut to the nearest lock position. Only back off one lug of the adjusting nut. Notice there are 2 lock positions, blah, blah, blah. Advance the adjusting nut opposite the bevel gear. That'll be the top one. Monitor the torque that is required in order to rotate the pinion shaft. Look for a torque increase, any torque increase. Tighten that adjusting nut, which is opposite the bevel gear. Tighten the adjusting nut until the lock can be installed. Do not install locks. You want to turn it, you know, get it to where you can put a lock in it, and you want to tighten it to get the lock into it. You don't want to back it off to get a lock into it. Then you put on tooling Q, which is a dial indicator, a magnetic based dial indicator. Measure the backlash of the bevel gear. The backlash should be 12 thousandths, plus or minus 4 thousandths. Assume that the measurement does not meet the specifications. Retract one nut, advance the other. Maintain the bearing preload. So you want to keep that preload the whole time you go, so it's not flopping like rocking in the bearings. So we're going to do that right now. I'll go ahead and adjust it to where I have the correct end play, and then we can check the run out, and then I'll come back to you guys with the camera. If you're actually going to be doing one of these, you can have this paperwork and you can do it on your own. It's basically just advancing one nut, like backing off the lower nut to get my clearance I need for my correct backlash, and then tightening the top one to make sure it's got the right preload on there. And then if that's the right backlash, that's where we lock it down to. All right, so I backed off the top adjusting nut. I ran in the bottom adjusting nut until there was 0 backlash. And then it told me to put the lock back in, but it told me to back it off until I can get the lock in. Now the lock can go, in fact, I'll show you on this end here. It can go here or here. So it can go like this. It can go like this. It can go like this, or it can go like this. So I backed it off till I was able to get one set of bolts in it, and then I locked that down. Then it said to tighten this one up. Well, I checked my rolling torque. It was 19 inch-pounds. I had to tighten this up until I felt the resistance on there to where this started measuring more. And then it said from there, you want to tighten this as much as you have to get to the next advance, advance it, tighten it more, get to the next spot where you can get a lock on. And just leave the lock there. You don't have to put the lock in yet till you're done setting the backlash. So I got that part done. And then next I'm going to put my dial indicator on to read the backlash. So I got the dial indicator set up, and I've got like maybe 0.003 backlash. So I'm going to go ahead and back this nut off a little bit and then tighten that one back down again and then see where we are. Okay, so what I did here is I backed it off until I'm getting 0.010. I'm getting almost 0.010 right there. And now I'll go through the exercise of lining it up with the lock. And I know I can back it out just a little bit if I need to get to the lock. Once I get that, then I'll set the tension back on this, the preload, and then we'll see where we're at. All right, I had to turn it out. All right, I had to back it out just a little bit more to get to the spot where I can get the lock in. And now I'll check it, and look at that, I've got just under 0.012 right now, and the tolerance is 0.012 plus or minus 4, so I could be anywhere. I could be 0.008 to 0.016. So I'm going to go ahead and set the preload now on the top bearing, and then we'll see if we maintain that clearance. Then we'll be good. I can put both these locks in, and then we're done with that. Then we can check the run out. Now see, the thing is, when I was talking about the pinion shaft before, how it had that HD number. So you know how many shims to put behind that race? You go through all this, and then if your run out's wrong, I got to take this whole thing apart again. I got to pull the differential back out. I got to pull the pinion shaft back out, knock that race back out, add or subtract shims, put it all back together. And I can guarantee you there's some lazy mechanics that would just leave the run out wrong. And we want the run out at a sweet point. We want it right there. You don't want it right in the middle of the teeth. You want it down at the heavy, thick part base of it. But you don't want it on the end. You want it right in there. And as you see different adjustments, you would see it grow like that. So one direction, turning in one direction is going to mark it high, turning the other direction is going to mark low. You know you're wrong. Same with here. So hopefully those HD numbers are correct on this one. They always have been for me. But as soon as I get this preload set and I get these locks in, then we could check our run out and see if we're good. If not, then that sucks. So anyways, let's keep going. All right, so I turn this around, and you can feel it too, because now the things are moving, and you're moved it a little bit, and your things are kind of moving along here. You can feel this, like you'll feel it, and you'll feel it grab. So as soon as I felt it grab, I tapped it a little bit further, and then I checked it on my torque wrench here, and there was more tension. It went from 19 inch-pounds to just over 20. And then now that I go to lay my locks in here, this is the closest position I can get, and I need to tighten it a little bit more to get to that lock, and that's going to be perfect. And then let me do that. I'll put the bolts in here, and then we'll check the backlash again. All right, well, it took about 6 tries back and forth to get this thing right, but I've got it to where both locks line up, and you can see I've got just under 0.012, 11 or 12 thousandths backlash right there. So that's good. It's perfectly in tolerance. So now I can put some Loctite on these screws, these bolts, and put these in. That part will be done. All right, so now that the backlash is set, I'm gonna go ahead and just spray some paint on both sides of the ring gear here, and then I'll roll it around a handful, a few times back and forth, and then that'll mark it, and we'll be able to see where our run out is. If the run out's good, I'm real happy. If not, you'll probably see my camera go flying across the yard here, and I won't be happy. Yep, sorry about that. I had the camera off when I sprayed the paint on there. I just rotated it one way, I'll rotate it the next way. This side looks beautiful. That side's a little high. That's not a bad spot. It's not on the bottom. Apparently by the other side it should be up a little bit more, but it's not bad. They're both in there really good. In fact, I'm going to consult the book and just see if they call that tolerable. If not, then I'm going to have to pull this thing all the way back apart and move that a little bit. Okay, so basically, you know, if they're both lined up like this, that's perfect. If you saw, the one direction was almost right where that is, pretty much right where that is. Just the other direction was up here, more towards the middle. I mean, if you look up here to where it's at a tolerance where it's not acceptable, it's where you're down here and you only have half of a mark on the bottom of the gear, or way the heck up here at the top of the gear. And we're right in the middle of the gear, and we're right in the sweet spot here. So I'm not going to bother for one tiny little shim to go in there and add that. This is good enough. It's going to be just fine in there. If it was like this, I would absolutely take it apart and adjust the shims. All right, so I had to get out the 3/4 inch torque wrench. It says to tighten the first two bolts that are opposite, the two main bolts that are opposite the bevel gear, to 390 foot-pounds, and to tighten the other two to 664 foot-pounds. My 3/4 inch torque wrench only goes to 600, and it's a mother to get yourself there. So I just tightened them pretty close to what they said, and I've never had a problem with that before. Seems to work out the way I do it, so use your own judgment on that. I've seen different values on different differentials, and I don't know if that's a typo or what, but they're appropriately tight. So now I can go ahead and install the locking unit and the parking brake disc and all that stuff. All right, so I've got it all cleaned up. Here's the screws. They take a Torx. They got the Loctite on them, and you have this down here so the bevel's side up on these holes, because these are like a tapered head screw. I don't know what they call that, but we'll get these in here. I'll run them in with this Makita impact, and then I'll go back and torque them. All right, so that's it. She's all done. Got a couple parts over there. I need to put a new seal in that. That's just the output drive that goes on the back of the axle housing, and that's the shaft that goes inside. It goes through here from this gear out the axle case to the rear axle. That's not a big deal. I'll change that in the morning before I take this out and install it. So that's it. It's gonna be a long video. It's a lot to these things, a lot of technical stuff, just a lot of process to it, I guess, actually. I don't really like doing these differentials, but the guy I'm doing it for, he's been a great customer of mine. Really good guy to rent to and work for. So that's it. That's how you rebuild one of these differentials. It's from a Cat 735. It's a center axle. It's got a hydraulic locking device on it. It's got the mounts for the parking brake. It's got the parking brake disc. So that's it. Anyways, thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and comment if you have something constructive to say. If you think you know how to do better than me, I really don't care. I've been doing these things for years, and I know what works. So please, no armchair mechanic on me on this one. Just enjoy it, or hopefully you can either just enjoy it as entertainment, or if it helps some of you guys out that need to rebuild something like this, then I'm glad to help. And anyways, thanks for watching.